The fork froze halfway to his mouth. The entire restaurant went silent. Every billionaire ego in the room, including his, felt suddenly very small. Because the black waitress he thought he had humiliated, the woman he believed didn't understand a word he said, looked him straight in the eyes and answered him fluently in the same foreign language he'd used to degrade her, exposing everything he'd whispered about her body, her intelligence, her place, and his plan to have her fired. You could hear someone gasp, you could hear a glass shatter, and in that moment, power changed hands. Welcome to my YouTube channel. This is my story of betrayal, and if you've ever trusted the wrong person, hit that subscribe button because you are not alone. Here is how it happened. Before I tell you who he was, before I tell you what he said, you need to understand why this hurt the way it did. I was reading comments on my YouTube videos the other day, and I realized I wasn't the only one who had ever been talked down to, underestimated, or quietly disrespected by someone who thought money made them untouchable. Thousands of you wrote about bosses, customers, teachers, even friends, people who smiled to your face and crushed you the moment they thought you were less than. This story is for every one of you. The restaurant was called Le Ciel Noir, black ceiling, soft gold lights, wait list stretching 3 months out, the kind of place where menus don't have prices and people don't ask. I had been working there for 11 months, no mistakes, no complaints, top reviews. But none of that mattered the night he walked in. They didn't say his name out loud, but everyone knew it. You could tell by the way the manager straightened his jacket, by the way the hostess whispered instead of spoke, by the way the room subtly rearranged itself to make space for one man and his confidence. A billionaire, old money, foreign accent, surrounded by executives who laughed too fast and nodded too hard. I was assigned to his table. I remember adjusting my apron, checking my posture, reminding myself, professional, calm, invisible. That's what servers learn early, be excellent but unseen. At first, everything was normal. Polite nods, minimal eye contact, short answers. Then, the switch flipped. He leaned back in his chair, glanced at his companions, and spoke in his language, slowly, deliberately, with a smirk. They all laughed. I didn't react. I kept pouring water. Then he said more, longer this time, sharper. The man to his right nearly choked laughing. Still, I said nothing. Because here's the thing no one knew. My grandmother raised me speaking that language. I was fluent before I was 10. I'd learned silence before sarcasm, observation before reaction, and I understood every single word. He wasn't just mocking me, he was dissecting me, my hair, my skin, my attitude. He joked that I was probably too stupid to understand, that people like me should be grateful to stand near tables like his. Then came the sentence that changed everything. He said, calmly, confidently, that after dinner he'd tell the owner I was difficult, that I'd ruined the experience, and that I wouldn't be working there much longer. And he smiled because he believed I was powerless. My hands shook for half a second. I steadied them, because betrayal doesn't always come from someone you love. Sometimes it comes from someone who thinks you don't deserve dignity. I walked back to the service station, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure the chefs could hear it. I had a choice, to swallow it like I had so many times before, or to do something no one in that room expected. When I returned to the table, he looked up, already bored, already dismissive. He opened his mouth to speak again, and that's when I decided I would answer him, not in English, but in his language, and what I said next would change my life and his forever. I didn't answer him right away. That pause, just 2 seconds, wasn't hesitation, it was control. I placed the wine bottle down gently, aligned the label perfectly, and straightened my spine. Years of customer service had trained my body to stay calm even when my chest was on fire. I looked at the table, at the men in tailored suits, at the way they leaned back like the world owed them comfort. Then I spoke, in his language, fluent, clean, precise. I said, "Would you prefer the 2009 Reserve, or would you like to continue insulting me while pretending I can't understand you?" The table froze. Every smile died at once, like someone had cut the power. His glass stopped midair. One man coughed, another stared at me like he'd just seen a ghost. The billionaire's eyes narrowed, not in anger yet, but in confusion, the kind of confusion that comes when reality refuses to obey your expectations. I continued, still calm, still professional. I repeated, word for word, everything he had said about me, about my hair, my skin, my intelligence, my place. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't change my tone. I simply translated his cruelty back to him, in his language. You could feel the air thicken. The restaurant noise faded into a distant hum. Nearby tables sensed something was wrong, but couldn't quite place it. One of the executives whispered, "She understood us?" The billionaire finally spoke. "Where did you learn that?" he asked stiffly. I smiled, not sweetly, not sarcastically, just enough to let him know something had shifted. "My grandmother," I replied. "She believed language was power. She was right." Silence. For the first time since he walked in, he wasn't the most powerful person at the table. But power doesn't disappear quietly. It fights back. His face hardened. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice like that made him dangerous again. "You're being inappropriate," he said. "You should know your role." There it was, the sentence every marginalized person knows by heart. I nodded once. "You're right," I said. "My role is to serve this table professionally, which is why I need to inform you that insulting staff violates restaurant policy, and threatening someone's job based on a lie does too." One of the executives shifted uncomfortably. Another avoided eye contact. The billionaire scoffed. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. I met his gaze. "Yes," I said, "and tonight I know exactly who you are." That landed harder than shouting ever could. He waved his hand dismissively. "Get your manager, immediately." I inclined my head. Of course. As I walked away, my legs felt like glass. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wasn't sure if I had just saved my dignity or destroyed my career. In the hallway behind the dining room, I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes for one breath. Just one, long enough to remember why I did this. Because silence is expensive, and I was done paying for it. I found my manager near the bar. His smile faded the moment he saw my face. "What happened?" he asked. I told him the truth, every word, calmly, clearly, without emotion. His jaw tightened. "That's a very serious accusation," he said carefully. "I know," I replied, "and I stand by it." He hesitated, then nodded. "I'll handle it." We walked back together. The billionaire looked pleased when he saw the manager, confident again, relaxed, already rehearsing his version of events. But something unexpected happened. Before the billionaire could speak, the manager turned to me. "Is it true," he asked, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "that you speak his language fluently?" "Yes," I answered. The billionaire's smile twitched. "And is it also true that you were insulted and threatened in that language?" "Yes." The manager turned to the table. "Gentlemen, Our restaurant has a zero tolerance for harassment, regardless of status. One executive cleared his throat. Another stared into his napkin. The billionaire laughed sharply. "You can't be serious." "I am," the manager said, "and we have audio recording in this section." That was a lie, but the billionaire didn't know that. His face drained of color. The power dynamic snapped, clean and loud. "You're accusing me?" he said, standing now. "I'm holding you accountable." For a moment, I thought that was it, that justice, small, rare justice, had actually won. Then the billionaire turned to me and smiled, not amused, not angry, calculating. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "People like you always think you've won right before you lose everything." My stomach dropped, because in that moment I realized something terrifying. Men like him don't need to yell. They don't need to threaten. They destroy reputations with phone calls, careers with whispers, lives with favors. And as he picked up his coat and walked out of the restaurant, every instinct in my body screamed the same truth. He wasn't done with me. He was just getting started.
The rest of my shift passed in a blur. People smiled at me more than usual. A couple at table 12 whispered, then slipped me an extra tip. Someone near the window gave me a small nod, quiet, supportive, like they'd felt the tension without knowing the details. But kindness doesn't erase fear. Every time the door opened, my chest tightened. Every vibration of my phone felt like a warning. I replayed his smile over and over in my head. Not loud, not dramatic, just cold and certain. That kind of confidence only comes from someone who has done this before. After closing, my manager asked me to sit in his office. He closed the door. "I want you to know," he said slowly, "you did the right thing." I nodded, but my throat felt tight. "However," he continued, rubbing his temples, "that man has influence. We're going to document everything, but I need you to be prepared." "For what?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. "For pushback," he said finally. That word followed me all the way home. 2 days later, the first crack appeared. I was taken off the weekend schedule. No explanation, no warning. When I asked, the assistant manager avoided my eyes. "It's temporary, just temporary." Temporary is how retaliation begins. Soft, polite, plausible. Then came the email. A single paragraph from corporate HR asking me to clarify an incident involving a high-profile guest and reminding me of the importance of professional demeanor. No mention of harassment, no mention of threats, just tone, just implication. I realized then that this wasn't just about one dinner. This was about control. At home, I called my mother. I didn't tell her everything. I never do. I just said work was stressful. She laughed gently. "Baby," she said, "when you make powerful people uncomfortable, they call it stress. When you stay silent, they call it professional." That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about how easily my version of events could disappear, how quickly truth becomes misunderstanding when the other side has money, lawyers, and connections. So I did the only thing I could. I started writing everything down. Dates, times, names, exact words. Not because I trusted the system, but because I didn't trust it. A week later, the billionaire's name appeared again, not in my inbox, on the news. A short segment playing on the TV in the break room. He was standing at a podium announcing a new international investment partnership. Applause, smiles, headlines about visionary leadership. Someone beside me muttered, "That guy's untouchable." My hands clenched, because behind that polished image was the man who laughed while planning to take my job, and now he was being celebrated. That's when the rumor started. A coworker pulled me aside near the lockers.
"Hey," she whispered, "I don't know if it's true, but management is saying you were hostile with a guest." My stomach dropped. Hostile? A word heavy enough to sink a career, vague enough to be anything. I asked who said it. She shook her head. "It's just going around." That's how reputations are dismantled, not with facts, but with fog. 3 days later, I was officially called into HR. The room was too clean, too white. 2 people sat across from me, hands folded, smiles practiced. "We're just here to understand your perspective," one of them said. They asked about my tone, my body language, whether I might have misinterpreted cultural humor. Cultural humor? I realized then what they were doing. They weren't investigating him, they were evaluating me. So I answered carefully, clearly, calmly. I told the truth again. When I finished, one of them leaned back and said, "Do you have proof?" I paused. "No," I said, "just witnesses." They exchanged a glance. Witnesses are fragile, stories are fragile, paperwork is not. That evening, something unexpected happened. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but I did. A woman's voice came through, steady, professional. "Is this the waitress from Le Ciel Noir?" I asked. "Yes," I said cautiously. "My name is Elena," she said. "I was sitting 3 tables away the night of the incident." My heart started racing. "I heard everything," she continued. "I also speak that language." I closed my eyes. She explained that she was a corporate attorney, not connected to the restaurant, not connected to him. "But I recognized something familiar," she said, "that look men get when they're used to never being challenged." She had already written a statement, not just about what he said, but about how calmly I responded. I don't like bullies, especially wealthy ones. When we hung up, I cried. Not because I was scared anymore, but because for the first time since that night, I felt backed up. The next morning, my schedule was cut again, but this time I wasn't panicking because I knew something management didn't realize yet. This story wasn't ending quietly. The billionaire thought he'd buried the problem. What he didn't know, what he could never imagine, was that people had been watching him for years, waiting for someone like me to speak first. And the next move, it wouldn't come from the restaurant. It would come from the past he thought with erased. The first message came in at 2:14 a.m. I was half asleep, phone glowing on my nightstand when the notification buzzed. Unknown sender, no profile picture, just text. "You're not the first." I sat up instantly. I typed back, "Who is this?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared. Then the reply came. Someone who watched him do the same thing to another woman 5 years ago, different country, same smile. My pulse thundered in my ears. By morning, there were 3 more messages. Names, dates, cities, a pattern. Each message was careful, measured, like the sender had learned the hard way what happens when you're careless around powerful people. One woman had been a translator at a private conference, another, a junior analyst at a subsidiary firm, another, a hotel concierge. Different roles, different countries, same outcome. Public humiliation, private threats, career damage, silence bought with fear. I realized something chilling. What happened to me wasn't personal, it was practice. I forwarded everything to Elena. She replied within minutes. "This is bigger than HR. Do not delete anything. Do not confront anyone. We need to move strategically." Strategically. That word used to scare me. It sounded like war rooms and suits and systems built to crush people like me, but now it felt like armor. At work, the atmosphere had changed. Conversations stopped when I entered the room. Smiles were polite, but distant. Management spoke to me like I was already a liability, careful, formal, cautious. I was being slowly erased. Then came the meeting invite. Mandatory staff review, attendance required. No agenda, no explanation, just a time and a room. I knew what that meant. The room was full. Managers, HR, a regional director I'd never met. I took a seat at the far end of the table. The director cleared his throat. "We've received concerns," he began, "about your conduct with a guest." There it was. I listened as they described a version of me I didn't recognize. Defensive, unprofessional, emotionally reactive. Each word landed like a stamp on a file. When they finished, the director folded his hands. "Before we proceed," he said, "is there anything you'd like to add?" I looked around the table. Then I spoke. "Yes," I said. "I'd like to submit written statements from multiple witnesses, including a corporate attorney, confirming verbal harassment in a foreign language. I'd also like to note that retaliation, such as reduced hours, began immediately after the incident." Silence. The HR rep blinked. "You have statements?" "I do," I said calmly, "and more are coming." The director's expression shifted, just slightly. He hadn't expected that. The meeting ended without resolution. That was their tell. When institutions stall, it's because they're recalculating risk. That afternoon, Elena called. "I did some digging," she said. "Your billionaire? He's in the middle of something very delicate." She explained that he was negotiating a massive cross-border deal, one that relied heavily on public image, cultural sensitivity, and, ironically, diversity commitments. He cannot afford a scandal, especially one involving language, race, and service staff. I laughed once, sharp, bitter. "Then why push so hard?" I asked. "Because men like him don't believe consequences apply to them until they do." That night, a new message arrived. This one had a name attached. "I saw what happened to you. I was his assistant." We spoke on a secure call. She told me things I can't repeat yet, about hush money, about NDAs, about how he joked in that same language about people he considered disposable. He thinks accents are armor. He thinks language makes him invisible. My hands trembled, not with fear, but with clarity. This wasn't just my story anymore. It was a pattern of abuse hidden behind sophistication. The next morning, my manager called me into his office again. He looked tired, worn down. "I'm going to be honest with you," he said. "We're getting pressure." "From who?" I asked. He didn't answer directly. "Maybe it would be best if you took a leave, let things cool off." That's when I knew. They weren't protecting me, they were protecting themselves. I stood up. "No, I won't disappear to make this easier for you." He sighed. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "No," I replied. "I'm making it visible." That evening, Elena sent me a draft, a formal complaint, multiple affidavits, a timeline that connected dots no one had dared to connect before. At the bottom, she wrote, "Once this is filed, there's no going back." I stared at the screen for a long time, because going forward meant risk, exposure, retaliation on a scale I couldn't fully predict. But going back meant silence, and silence had already cost too many women everything. I signed. 2 hours later, my phone rang. Private number. I answered. The voice on the other end was calm, familiar. The billionaire. "I hear you've been telling stories," he said. Not angry, not loud, dangerously composed. "You have no idea what you're playing with," he continued. "This can end quietly, or it can end badly for you." I didn't raise my voice. "I think," I said, You should be more worried about how it ends for you. There was a pause, then a low chuckle. We'll see, he said. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, heart racing, because I knew something he didn't. The story was already moving, and the next part, it wouldn't be handled behind closed doors. The article went live at 6:03 a.m. I didn't even see it first. My phone started vibrating nonstop. Texts, missed calls, notifications stacking faster than I could read them. When I finally opened one message, it was from Elena. It's out. National outlet. Front page. My stomach dropped. I opened the link. The headline stared back at me in bold letters, impossible to ignore. Billionaire executive accused of using foreign language to harass and threaten service workers. I sat on the edge of my bed, heart pounding so hard it felt unreal. My name wasn't in the headline, but my story was there, carefully verified, corroborated, backed by witnesses, statements, and timelines. Not sensational, not emotional, devastatingly factual. Within an hour, everything changed. His company issued a no comment, then another statement, shorter, colder, calling the accusations mischaracterizations. That word again. But this time it didn't land the same, because the internet doesn't care how expensive your lawyers are when receipts start appearing. By noon, social media had found the story. People translated the foreign language quotes themselves. Linguists weighed in. Cultural experts explained exactly why his words weren't jokes, weren't misunderstandings, weren't harmless. They were deliberate, calculated, cruel. Someone started a thread, how power hides behind language. It exploded. At work, chaos. Management called an emergency meeting. HR suddenly sounded nervous instead of confident. Policies were referenced. Words like review and liability started appearing. I was asked, politely now, if I'd like legal representation present for future conversations. I almost laughed. But the real shift happened late that afternoon. Elena called me, her voice tight with adrenaline. He's panicking, she said. He didn't expect the international angle. Multiple countries are picking this up. I stared out my window, watching traffic move like nothing in the world had changed. What does that mean? I asked. It means, she said, he's losing control of the narrative, and men like him can't stand that. Then came the call I never expected. A senior editor from a major broadcast network. They wanted me on camera. I said no at first. Then I remembered every woman who had gone silent before me, every career quietly erased, every story that died in private because speaking felt too dangerous. I'll do it, I said, but on my terms. The interview was recorded the next day. No makeup team, no dramatic lighting. Just me, my voice, my words. I didn't insult him. I didn't exaggerate. I explained how power uses language as a weapon, how humiliation doesn't always shout, it whispers in rooms where it thinks no one understands. When the interviewer asked how it felt to speak up, I paused. It felt terrifying, I said honestly, and then it felt necessary. The segment aired that night, and that's when the dam broke. Former employees, former assistants, former partners, stories poured out, some public, some anonymous, all eerily similar. Different accents, same entitlement. Different victims, same playbook. At 11:47 p.m., Elena sent me a single message. Board meeting, emergency. I exhaled slowly, because now the consequences were finally catching up to him. But power doesn't fall gracefully. It lashes out. The next morning, I was served papers. A legal notice, cease and desist. He was accusing me of defamation. My hands shook as I read it, not because it was strong, but because it was desperate. Elena wasn't worried. This is intimidation, and it's backfiring. She was right. The filing became public within hours. The backlash doubled. That afternoon, my manager called again. This time, his voice was different, measured, careful, afraid. He said, "We want to make sure you feel supported. Corporate is reevaluating." I closed my eyes. Support always comes late. By evening, news broke that his company had placed him on temporary leave. Temporary. The same word they'd used on me. I smiled for the first time in weeks, but I didn't celebrate. Because I knew this wasn't the end. Men like him don't accept loss quietly. They wait, they plan, they strike when you think it's safe. And as I stood in my kitchen, phone buzzing with messages from strangers thanking me for speaking up, a single thought settled heavy in my chest. If this was how far he'd fall publicly, what would he try to do privately? The silence after the fall is never quiet. It hums. That's the only way I can describe the days after he was placed on temporary leave. No press conferences, no smug photos, just a low, constant tension, like the world was holding its breath, waiting to see who would blink first. It wasn't going to be me. The first sign that he was still fighting came through the back door. Not the media, not the courts, my landlord. He called one morning, voice awkward, apologetic. "I got a call," he said. "Someone asking questions about you, said they were doing a background check." My stomach tightened. "Did they say who they were?" I asked. "No," he replied, "just sounded important." Important is how intimidation dresses itself when it wants to look legal. I hung up and immediately called Elena. She didn't sound surprised. "This is escalation," she said. "He's trying to make you feel watched." And it worked. For about 5 minutes. Then something else kicked in, something steadier than fear. Anger. I stopped moving quietly. I documented everything. Every call, every message, every strange coincidence. When a car slowed too long outside my building, I wrote it down. When an unknown number called and hung up, I logged it. When someone tried to access my old employee records online, Elena's cybersecurity contact flagged it. Patterns were forming, and patterns don't lie. Meanwhile, the world kept turning, just not in his favor. Sponsors began distancing themselves. A keynote invitation was postponed indefinitely. A university quietly removed his name from an upcoming event. No announcements, no explanations, just absence. That kind of disappearance hurts men like him more than headlines ever could. Then came the email that changed the direction of everything. It wasn't from a journalist. It wasn't from a lawyer. It was from his company's internal compliance department. They wanted to speak to me, formally, with independent counsel present. Elena read it twice, then looked up at me. "This," she said, "means they're done protecting him." The meeting was held over secure video. 4 faces on the screen, neutral, professional, controlled. They asked me to recount everything again, but this time the questions were different. Not what did you do, but what did he do? Dates, languages, witnesses, prior incidents. They already knew some of the answers. They were confirming. At the end, one of them spoke carefully. "Thank you for your courage," he said. "This information aligns with other reports." Other reports, plural. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, lights off, city glowing outside my window. I thought about how close I'd come to staying silent, about how easily this could have ended with me quietly losing my job, my confidence, my voice. And I thought about how much effort it took to protect someone like him, entire systems bending to absorb his damage until they couldn't anymore. 2 days later, the headline changed. Not allegations, investigation, independent, external, global. His name was still there, but now it was surrounded by words he couldn't control. That's when he reached out again, not by phone, by email, short, direct. We need to talk privately. I stared at the screen for a long time. This was the moment he'd been waiting for, the one-on-one, the negotiation, the subtle pressure. I forwarded it to Elena. Her reply was immediate. Do not respond. Let him spiral. And he spiraled. Within 48 hours, leaked documents began circulating, expense reports, settlements, NDAs with familiar phrasing. Journalists connected dots faster than anyone expected. What had started with a single dinner was now unraveling a decade of behavior. At work, the tone shifted again, this time completely. I was reinstated to full hours, given a written apology, offered a confidential settlement for the distress caused. I declined the money. What I want, I said calmly, is policy change, training, and a written acknowledgement of what happened. They agreed quickly. Institutions move fast when the spotlight stays on. But the most unexpected moment came from a place I never imagined. A message request on my YouTube channel from a young woman overseas. She wrote, "He did this to my sister. She never recovered. Thank you for saying something." I sat there, hands shaking. This was bigger than justice. This was interruption. The investigation report was scheduled to release, a date, a time. Everyone knew it was coming, and everyone knew what it would say. The night before, Elena called me. Tomorrow, she said, everything becomes official. I exhaled slowly. Is there anything I should be prepared for? I asked. She paused. Yes, she said, his response. Because men like him don't just lose power. They explode when it's taken away. And the next day, when the findings dropped and his resignation became inevitable, he would make one final move, one last attempt to control the ending, and it would be the most dangerous one yet. The report dropped at exactly 9 a.m. No countdown, no warning, just a PDF link that detonated across newsrooms, inboxes, and boardrooms all at once. I didn't open it right away. I stood in my kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold, listening to my phone vibrate nonstop on the counter. Elena had warned me, when power collapses, it's loud, but this was something else. Then I saw the headline. Independent investigation confirms pattern of harassment, coercion, and retaliation by global executive. No alleged, no claimed, confirmed. My knees went weak. I sat down. Within minutes, his resignation followed. Not a speech, not an apology, a 2-sentence statement from the board thanking him for his past contributions and announcing an immediate separation. Immediate. The word hit different when it wasn't being used against me. The internet exploded. Clips from my interview resurfaced. Screenshots of the report went viral. Former employees posted stories, some trembling, some furious, some relieved. This wasn't just exposure. This was collapse. At 9:27 a.m., my phone rang. Private number. I stared at it. Heart racing. Elena had told me not to answer unknown calls today. She'd said this was the most dangerous moment, not legally, but emotionally. When men like him realize the door is closing forever, they don't negotiate. They panic. The phone stopped ringing. Then a message came through. "You think this ends with me?" I didn't respond. Another message followed seconds later. "You took everything." My hand shook, not from fear, but from the weight of that sentence. Everything, as if dignity, accountability, and consequences belonged to him. Then it escalated. A news alert flashed across my screen. Former executive denies findings, claims personal vendetta. He was fighting the report publicly now, calling it biased, accusing unnamed individuals of exaggeration, hinting darkly at coordinated attacks. And then, there it was, a quote. He referenced a disgruntled service worker who misunderstood private conversation. My chest tightened. He hadn't named me, but everyone knew. Elena called immediately. "He's trying to reframe, classic last stand, but listen to me carefully. Do not respond emotionally. This phase doesn't last long." "How long?" I asked. She exhaled. "Until the truth corners him." By noon, that corner was closing fast. A former board member went on record contradicting him. A leaked email showed he'd been warned years earlier. Then the final blow landed. A recording. Not from my restaurant, from another country, another year. His voice, that same language, that same tone, clear, undeniable. The clip spread like wildfire. There was no defending it. I was watching the news when my doorbell rang. My heart jumped. I wasn't expecting anyone. I checked the peephole. A man in a suit. No badge, no uniform, just waiting. Every instinct screamed. I didn't open the door. "Who is it?" I called out. He cleared his throat. "I'm here on behalf of—" "No," I said firmly. "You can leave." There was a pause. Then footsteps. I locked the deadbolt and leaned against the door, heart pounding. I called Elena with shaking hands. She didn't hesitate. That was him, or someone for him. He's running out of options. The afternoon dragged like a held breath. Every hour brought another update, sponsors pulling out, charities returning donations, a university rescinding an honorary title. The world was closing ranks. And then, at 4:45 p.m., the headline no one expected. Former executive detained for questioning in unrelated financial misconduct case. Unrelated. That's how these things always surface. Once the armor cracks, everything spills out. I stared at the screen, stunned. This wasn't just about words anymore. This was about who he'd been allowed to be for years, unchecked, protected, untouchable. Until now. My phone buzzed again. A final message from the private number. "You ruined me." I stared at the words. Then I typed back. "No, you did that yourself." I blocked the number. That evening, I went for a walk. For the first time in weeks, the air felt different, lighter, like a storm had finally moved on. People recognized me, not with pity, not with curiosity, but with something else. Respect. A woman stopped me near the corner store. "I saw your interview," she said softly. "Thank you." I nodded, unable to speak. At home, I finally opened the full report. Page after page, my story was there, but it wasn't alone. It was one thread in a tapestry of voices that had been waiting for daylight. And I understood something then that I hadn't before. This wasn't about humiliation in a restaurant. It was about what happens when someone you underestimate refuses to disappear. Late that night, Elena called one last time. "It's over," she said. "He can't touch you anymore." I sat quietly, letting the words settle. Over. Not erased, not forgotten. Finished. But as I stared out the window at the city lights, I knew something else, too. The story wasn't ending with him. It was ending with me, standing, intact, unashamed. And the final chapter wouldn't be about revenge. It would be about what comes after survival.
The morning after everything ended, I woke up before my alarm. No buzzing phone, no breaking alerts, no emergency calls. Just quiet. For the first time in months, my chest didn't feel tight. The air in my apartment felt neutral. Not heavy, not electric, just still. That's when I realized something strange. I wasn't relieved, I was awake. Power doesn't just disappear when it collapses. It leaves behind a vacuum, and in that quiet space, you finally hear yourself again. I made coffee and stood by the window, watching people rush to work, unaware that a storm had passed through my life and moved on. The world hadn't stopped. It rarely does. But I had changed. Messages kept coming in, not from journalists, not from lawyers, but from people. Servers, assistants, students, immigrants. People who had been told in 1,000 subtle ways that their silence was the price of survival. One message stayed with me. I thought I was weak for understanding and saying nothing. Now I realized I was trained to stay quiet. That sentence hit harder than any headline, because that's the real betrayal, not what powerful people do, but how early we're taught to accept it. The restaurant reopened a week later with new policies posted clearly at the entrance: zero tolerance, language-inclusive reporting, independent escalation channels. They asked me if I wanted my old role back permanently. I said yes, but on my terms. I no longer moved invisibly through that space. I didn't shrink my voice to fit anyone's comfort. I did my job with pride, not permission. And something else happened too. People listened. One night, a young server pulled me aside. She whispered, "I heard what you did. I didn't know we could do that." I looked at her and said, "Neither did I, until I did." The billionaire faded from the news cycle the way fallen giants always do. Not with redemption, not with justice perfectly served, but with distance. His name became a cautionary reference, a footnote in discussions about power, accountability, and the lies people tell themselves when they think no one can hear them. That's the part people don't talk about enough. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's being remembered correctly. I didn't become famous like I'd planned. I didn't become rich. I didn't become untouchable. I became unignorable. And that mattered more. I kept my YouTube channel going, not as a platform for outrage, but for truth. I talked about language, about how intelligence is often mistaken for accent, about how dignity doesn't announce itself, it waits to be recognized. And every time I hesitated before hitting upload, I remembered that first moment in the restaurant. The pause, the eye contact, the choice. Power didn't shift because I spoke perfectly. It shifted because I spoke at all. Here's the moral they don't teach you. Cruelty thrives in assumptions, silence feeds entitlement, and respect isn't earned through status, it's revealed under pressure. The billionaire thought language would protect him. He was wrong. Because language doesn't belong to the powerful, it belongs to the people who survive long enough to master it. If you're watching this and you've ever been underestimated, spoken over, laughed at behind a smile, know this: you don't owe anyone your silence. You don't need permission to understand more than they expect.
And the moment you decide to stand fully in who you are, calm, prepared, unashamed, you become something power fears deeply, a witness. This wasn't a story about revenge. It was a story about refusal. Refusal to disappear, refusal to doubt what I heard, refusal to accept humiliation as the cost of existing. And if you take one thing from this story, let it be this. The most dangerous thing you can do to someone who underestimates you is prove them right about your silence and wrong about everything else.